Imagine the man the world knows for his razor-sharp honesty. The one who could shatter dreams with a single look, suddenly being shaken in a way that no stage, no spotlight, and no camera could prepare him for. Simon Cowell, the judge who built an empire on toughness, found himself facing something he couldn't control, something that pulled him out of the bright lights and into the quiet, fragile world of fatherhood. It all began on a Valentine's Day that would change everything. February 14th, 2014, the day Eric Philip Cowell came into Simon's life. For years, Simon had laughed off the idea of being a dad. He'd say he was too old, too stubborn, too set in his ways. But the moment he saw the first scan of Eric, something inside him cracked open. He admitted later, "I thought I'd never feel love like that again after losing my parents. Then I saw him, and that was it. I was besotted." The man who once lived only for shows, deals, and ratings suddenly cared about bedtime stories and tiny hands that fit into his. Eric was just a baby to Simon. He was a legacy named after Simon's father, carrying forward a piece of the man who shaped him. But unlike many celebrity kids, Simon was determined his son wouldn't grow up spoiled. He wanted Eric to learn the value of work, of grounding, of being his own person. And yet, as Eric grew, Simon started to notice things. Small things at first, moments that made him pause. A silence that lingered longer than expected. A reaction to noise that seemed more intense than other children's. By Eric's second birthday, something weighed heavily on Simon's heart. While other children were speaking, forming words, filling their worlds with sound, Eric remained quiet. Simon tried to tell himself it was fine, that some kids simply take longer. But deep down, the man whose entire career was built on instinct couldn't ignore what he felt. His son wasn't just developing differently. He was walking his own unique path. Nights became restless. Instead of judging singers or signing artists, Simon spent hours researching, reading, and wondering. He noticed how bright Eric was, how much he understood, how deeply he observed the world. But the way he expressed himself wasn't the way others expected. Simon realized milestones didn't define his son. Smiles, small connections, moments off breakthrough, that was the new measure of success. The world, of course, saw none of this. They saw the Simon they thought they knew, the man behind the judging table, the tough critic. And yet, if you look closely, you could see the cracks forming, the softness creeping in. Fans adored the glimpses of Simon as Adad, like the golden buzzer moment when Eric appeared on Britain's Got Talent. But what they didn't see were the hours Simon spent carefully crafting safe spaces for Eric, making sure the chaos of the entertainment world wouldn't overwhelm him. Slowly, headlines began shifting. Articles spoke of how fatherhood had softened Simon. But the truth went deeper. This wasn't just about becoming gentler. It was about Amon learning how to fight for someone in a way he'd never fought before. Behind closed doors, Simon turned down deals, restructured his life, and built his world around his son. And all the while, whispers grew online. People noticed Eric's differences, speculated quietly. They didn't know the private storm Simon was navigating. The fear, the hope, the fierce love that drove him to protect his child at all costs. Because this wasn't the story of Simon Cowell, the judge. It was the story of Simon Cowell, the father. A man who once measured success in ratings, now finding it in the smallest of victories. A word spoken, a smile earned, a moment of connection that meant more than any standing ovation ever could. Would you like me to take this even further and shape the next part into a crescendo where the heartbreaking diagnosis lands like a revelation in the narrative, so it grips the viewer and makes the desperate to stay until the very end? The rumors were getting louder. Whispers on gossip sites, speculation in forums, strangers drawing conclusions about a little boy they didn't even know. And yet Simon stayed silent, not because he didn't care, but because he knew his son's privacy was worth more than feeding the curiosity of the world. What no one saw was the quiet journey behind closed doors, the late nights in doctors' offices, the endless research, the specialists, the questions that haunted him. Each appointment wasn't about labels or judgments. It was about understanding his son, about giving him the tools to thrive. It's a strange irony, isn't it? Simon Cowell, the man who made a career out of judging others, suddenly learned that life isn't about measuring up to someone else's standard. Eric was teaching him that success looks different for every person. And sometimes, the most beautiful moments happen away from the cameras, in the stillness of a quiet room, where a little boy finally feels free to be himself. The turning point came when Eric was 4. A family vacation meant to be perfect turned into something that revealed truths Simon could no longer ignore. New routines, the sounds, the chaos of unfamiliar places, it all overwhelmed Eric. One night at dinner, surrounded by clinking dishes and loud voices, Eric pressed his hands over his ears and rocked, retreating into a world where Simon couldn't reach him. That night, Simon and Lauren made the decision that would change everything. They would seek help, not because they thought Eric was broken, but because they wanted to understand how to love him better. And then came the day in December 2018. A small office, a team of specialists, and words that seemed to hang heavy in the air: autism spectrum disorder. Simon had braced himself for this possibility, but hearing it said out loud made it real. He asked quietly, almost like a child himself, "What does this mean for his future?" The answer was gentle, filled with hope. Eric wasn't limited. He was different. With the right support, he could flourish. Simon clung to that word: differently, not broken. That evening, he sat with Eric, watching him line up to cars in perfect rows, his little hands moving with precision and calm. And in that moment, something shifted. Eric didn't need fixing. He needed a world that would see his brilliance in ways most people couldn't. But knowing the truth didn't make the journey easier. Simon's home became a sanctuary built around Eric's needs. Routines replaced spontaneity. Therapy session filled the calendar. A simple play date required careful planning. And Simon, once the king of chaos, became the keeper of structure, building a life where his son could feel safe. There were moments of grief, not for Eric, but for the father. Simon thought he would be the carefree dad who would teach his boy to ride a bike, share casual conversations, and take spontaneous adventures. That version of fatherhood was gone. In its place was something different, more patient, more tender, more profound. The world eventually caught on. Speculation turned to stories. Stories turned to headlines. When photos of Eric in distress began circulating with cruel, thoughtless commentary, Simon knew silence wasn't protecting him anymore. For the first time, he spoke. He told the truth that Eric was autistic, that he was loved, that he was happy. He asked for privacy. And while the response was mixed, there were messages from parents, from advocates, from strangers who finally felt seen. Simon had traded privacy for connection, and while it hurt, it also healed. But the hardest goodbye wasn't to the privacy, or even to the freedom he once had. It was the dream of a typical father. He had to mourn the conversations that might never happen, the milestones that would always come harder, the moments that other parents seemed to take for granted. And yet, in letting go of that dream, Simon found something even greater. Because the bond shared with Eric wasn't built on words. It was built on looks, on gestures, on an understanding deeper than language. It was love in its purest form. And maybe that was the point all along, that the toughest man on television had been given the greatest challenge of his life. Not to judge, not to criticize, not to win, but to love fiercely and without condition. So maybe the real goodbye wasn't about losing anything at all. Maybe it was about saying farewell to expectations and embracing reality. A reality where love, patient, vulnerable, unconditional love is worth more than any career,